In a small town in Catalonia in the year 1632, a textile worker was asked a profound question: "Do you believe in God?" He answered with a simple yet startling response: "Yes, and believing in God means good food, good drink, and getting up at 10 o'clock." This worker's answer captures the everyday, practical nature of faith in a world where beliefs were often more about daily life than abstract doctrines. The Iberian Peninsula, where this worker lived, was a place of contrasts and coexistence. In the 15th century, it was like a borderland between the known and the unknown. The land had been visited by the Phoenicians and Greeks, conquered by the Romans and the Arabs, and was now on the brink of becoming a gateway to New World. To the west, Portugal, a small but ambitious nation, was venturing into the Atlantic and establishing trade routes in Asia. To the south, Al-Andalus, with its 500,000 farmers and silk producers, was a proud remnant of a once dominant Islamic culture. In the center and north, Christian Spain was home to around 6 million people, divided into the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. Christian Spain was not always confident in its survival. During the Middle Ages, it seemed as if much of Western Europe might fall to Islam. The Muslims had already taken control of the eastern Mediterranean, including the holy cities of Jerusalem and Alexandria, and were pushing into the Western Sea. They had even sacked Rome and built fortresses along the coasts of Italy and France. In the 10th century, the Caliphate of Al-Andalus ruled most of the Iberian Peninsula, and in the late 11th century, the great conqueror Al-Mansur captured several Christian cities, including Leon and Santiago. Despite the conflicts, the three main faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, had lived side by side for centuries. They intermarried, exchanged ideas, and shared languages. This coexistence was not always peaceful, but it was a reality that shaped the culture and society of the region. Christians lived under Muslim rule as Mozarabs, and Muslims lived under Christian rule as Mudéjars. Both groups sometimes suffered social disadvantages, but they also formed alliances and cooperated in times of need. One of the most famous examples of this cooperation was the Cid, a Castilian noble named Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar. In the late 11th century, he transferred his services from the Christians to the Muslim ruler of Saragossa, and eventually became the independent ruler of the Muslim city of Valencia. Despite his association with Muslims, he was later celebrated by Christians as their ideal warrior. Kings like Saint Ferdinand of Castile, who ruled from 1230 to 1252, called themselves King of the Three Religions, a title that reflected the complex and diverse society they governed. Even the philosopher Ramon Llull, who lived in the 13th century, wrote dialogues in Arabic where the characters were a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew, discussing their beliefs and finding common ground. However, as the centuries passed, the conflicts between the faiths became more intense. Christians began to cultivate the legend of Saint James or Santiago as the Moor Slayer, and Muslims from North Africa, like the Almoravides and the Almohads, brought a more militant religious fervor to their struggles against the Christians. Despite the tensions, the people of the Mediterranean continued to interact and influence each other. The city of Barcelona, for example, was a bustling center of trade and culture, visited by merchants from across the Mediterranean. It was also a key location for the ransom of slaves, who often brought back stories and ideas from their experiences in different lands. The Mediterranean was a place where cultures blended and clashed, where people of different faiths lived together, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in conflict. In towns and cities across the region, Muslims, Christians, and Jews participated in each other's celebrations, shared food and music, and even collaborated in times of crisis. In Murcia, Muslim musicians played in Christian religious processions, and in Tarazona, almost all the musicians in the Corpus Christi procession were Muslims. But coexistence was not always easy. In times of drought or other crises, tensions could flare up, leading to riots and violence. Yet even in these moments, there were acts of kindness and solidarity. In Hewitt during the 1470s, a poor orphan named Diego Gonzalez received alms from both Jews and Muslims, and later, he even learned a bit of Hebrew from his Jewish neighbors. The story of Spain and the Mediterranean is a story of faith and doubt, of conflict and cooperation, of people trying to make sense of a world where different beliefs and cultures coexisted. It is a story that continues to resonate, reminding us of the complexity and richness of human history. In the late medieval times, the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain is today, was a place of mixed beliefs and cultures. There were Christians, Muslims, and Jews living side by side. Despite this mix, it's interesting that there were no formal heresies, no organized groups that openly opposed the church during this time. This wasn't the case in other parts of Europe, where heresies were more common. Church leaders started to define what they meant by heresy, because they noticed that many people in Spain, especially in Castile, seemed not to understand basic Christian teaching. A friar named Felipe de Meneses noticed this in the mid-1500s, saying that out of 300 people, only about 30 knew what a Christian should know. There were also books and reports from the time that talked about widespread superstitions and witchcraft, and some people even believed in magic. Religious practices among Christians were a mix of community traditions, folklore, and unclear beliefs. Some people, including priests, openly said they didn't believe in an afterlife, like heaven or hell. One priest even said that the best thing in life was to have a good friend and eat well, and that there was no heaven or hell. Another person said that these ideas about the afterlife were just made up to scare children. These kinds of statements were not common, and most people didn't agree with them. In fact, when someone made such a statement, their neighbors often reported them to the Inquisition. The Inquisition, a court set up by the church to deal with heresy, often saw these statements as signs of ignorance rather than true disbelief. For example, in 1484, a man named Jaime Martinez in Teruel said that God was like a tree that loses its leaves in winter, and that people were made and unmade in the same way. This kind of thinking was seen as simple and rustic, rather than a serious challenge to the church. When Christian soldiers fought against Muslims, they were passionate about their beliefs, but in everyday life, they were more relaxed. People often had to get along with neighbors of different faiths. In 1487, someone in Soria said that the king shouldn't be driving out Muslims who hadn't done anything wrong. Another person said that Muslims and Jews could be saved in their own faiths, just like Christians. The Inquisition heard many such statements, which show that people were more tolerant of different beliefs than we might expect. The Inquisition wasn't created by a fanatically Catholic society. Spaniards were divided in their religious beliefs, just as they were divided by their different cultures. Christians sometimes served Muslim leaders, and some even converted to Islam. There were also Muslims who had converted to Christianity, but later went back to Islam. This shows that the lines between different faiths were not always clear. Even after the fall of Granada in 1492, many Spaniards still believed that different faiths could coexist. In the 1620s, a woman of Muslim origin in Granada said that Muslims and Jews could be saved in their own faiths. A Christian peasant in the same area said that everyone could find salvation in their own faith. This attitude was common and could be found all over Spain. The idea that there was a single, true religion was not always accepted. People often expressed doubts about religion and its ministers. In 1490, someone in Cuenca said they didn't care about the Gospels, and another person said that religion was a fraud from the Pope down. A Jewish doctor in Soria in 1491 even said that a neighbor was neither Christian nor Jewish. The absence of formal heresy in late medieval Spain might have been because of the multiple cultures. Each faith tried to maintain its own purity, but there was still a lot of coexistence. The Inquisition, which was active in other parts of Europe, wasn't really needed in Spain. There was no organized heresy, and the legal system didn't have a way to deal with non-believers or shaky converts. Tolerance, in the sense of allowing people to have different beliefs, wasn't a formal concept in the 1500s. But in Spain, as in other places with cultural diversity, people had to get along. There were legal protections for different faiths, and local lords often allowed their Muslim and Jewish subjects to keep their tradition. This changed with the rise of centralized states, which brought more persecution. Even in early modern times, some Spanish Christians, like the secretary of Isabella of Castile, Hernando del Pulgar, and the confessor Hernando de Talavera, opposed religious coercion and the use of the death penalty. Later, the humanist and Bishop Alonso de Verus and the Jesuit Juan de Mariana criticized intolerance and forced conversion. These voices, while not widespread, show that Spain wasn't a monolithic society. Among ordinary people, there were also those who opposed violence in religion. In 1545, the theologian Alfonso de Castro heard people in Zamora criticizing the wars against Protestants, saying that it wasn't Christian to use violence against heretics. In the shadow of the three great faiths, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there were also people who seemed to have no active belief in any formal religion. Some saw this as a result of coexistence or persecution. Without knowing their private lives, it's hard to say if they were true unbelievers or atheists. But they did exist, and they were part of the complex religious landscape of pre-industrial Europe. The era of mixed beliefs and fragile coexistence in Spain began to change with the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella. Their marriage in 1469 helped end a decade of civil war and brought together the two major kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. To stabilize their power, they had to make alliances with nobles and church leaders and deal with social conflict, especially in regions with large Muslim and Jewish populations, like Andalusia. This led to the establishment of the Inquisition in 1478, which was meant to investigate heresy among Christians of Jewish origin. However, the Inquisition didn't bring peace. It only made the conflicts worse. In the heart of medieval Spain, the world of Jews was a complex tapestry woven with threads of coexistence, tension, and change. The Jews had been living in the Iberian Peninsula for centuries, perhaps since the 3rd century. By the Middle Ages, they formed the largest Jewish community in the world, scattered across the land, though they only made up about 2% of Spain's population. Despite their small numbers, Jews played a vital role in the social and economic fabric of the region. Life for Jews in medieval Spain was a blend of prosperity and vulnerability. They were known for their contributions in various fields, especially in medicine, finance, and as skilled craftsmen. Jewish doctors were highly respected and often served the royal courts, while Jewish financiers managed the kingdom's revenues. In many towns, Jews lived side by side with Christians and Muslims, engaging in daily interactions that fostered a sense of mutual understanding, even if it didn't always translate into deep friendship. However, this peaceful coexistence was often fragile. The Jews were a minority, and their presence sometimes sparked jealousy and mistrust. For instance, in the 13th century, the Church began to impose restrictions on Jews, such as requiring them to wear distinctive clothing to set them apart. This was meant to prevent mixing with Christians, but in Spain, these rules were not always strictly enforced. Jews continued to live in their own neighborhoods, called aljamas, which were like small communities within the larger towns. These aljamas had their own leaders and paid taxes directly to the crown, giving them a degree of autonomy. The turning point came in the mid-14th century. Civil wars and economic distress created a volatile environment. In 1391, a series of violent riots broke out in several cities, targeting the Jewish communities. The riots were sparked by religious fervor and economic grievances. In Seville, hundreds of Jews were killed, and the Aljama was destroyed. The violence quickly spread to other cities, including Cordoba, Valencia, and Barcelona. Many Jews were forced to convert to Christianity to save their lives, giving rise to a new group known as conversos, or New Christians. The conversos faced a unique set of challenges. They were often suspected of secretly practicing Judaism, which made them vulnerable to persecution. The term marrano, meaning swine, was used to insult them. Despite the forced conversions, some conversos chose to remain in their new religion, often out of necessity. This created a complex social dynamic, where conversos were neither fully trusted by their former Jewish community, nor fully accepted by the Christian majority. In the years leading up to the end of the 15th century, the position of Jews in Spain continued to deteriorate. The Inquisition, established by Ferdinand and Isabella, became a powerful force, focusing on rooting out heresy, including the secret practice of Judaism by conversos. The Inquisition's reach expanded, and the atmosphere of suspicion and fear grew. Despite these challenges, some Jewish communities managed to maintain a degree of stability. In towns like Murvidro, Jews escaped the violence and even saw their numbers grow as refugees from other areas sought safety. In rural areas, Jewish farmers and peasants could be found, working the land and living peacefully with their Christian neighbors. In Buitrago, a prosperous Jewish community owned extensive lands, including fields, meadows, and vineyards. In Hida, Jews were heavily involved in the wine industry, owning hundreds of vineyards. The social and economic roles of Jews varied across the peninsula. In Avila, the Jewish community was one of the largest, making up nearly half the city's population. In Zamora, the Jewish population grew, representing 1/5 of the town's residents. In many parts of Castile, relations between Jews and Christians remained cordial, with a sense of mutual respect and cooperation. The story of the Jews in medieval Spain is one of resilience and adaptation. Despite the challenges and often violent backdrop, they continue to contribute to the cultural and economic life of the region. Their presence was a testament to the complex and often contradictory nature of medieval society, where coexistence and conflict existed side by side. In the years following the violent events of 1391, the Jewish communities in Spain faced a complex and often contradictory situation. Despite the reduced numbers, these communities managed to preserve their cultural identity and even enjoyed a level of protection from the nobility and the royal crown. In 1432, for example, the Jews of Valladolid drew up a comprehensive set of laws to govern their community, showing that they were still organized and resilient. The kings of Aragon, such as Alfonso V and Juan II, actively supported the recovery of the Jewish communities known as aljamas, which paid taxes directly to the royal treasury. In 1479, Ferdinand of Aragon explicitly confirmed the autonomy of the Jewish community in Saragossa. The Jewish community also included many wealthy individuals who played significant roles in the economy. Don Abraham Senior, for instance, had a fortune worth around 6 million maravedis, 16,000 ducats in 1490, which included land and properties in Segovia and Andalusia. Another prominent figure, Melamed, owned properties worth over half that amount, including houses and lands in Segovia and Avila. However, tensions and pressures were also present. In 1412, a decree in Castile, inspired by the zealous St. Vincent Ferrer and the converso Bishop Pablo de Santa Maria, imposed severe restrictions on Jews. They were forbidden from holding office, changing their place of residence, and engaging in various trades. They were also not allowed to bear arms, hire Christians, or interact socially with Christians. They were even restricted in the type of clothing they could wear. In practice, these extreme laws were often ignored or revoked. In 1413 to 1414, Vincent Ferrer organized a debate between Christian and Jewish scholars in Tortosa, overseen by Pope Benedict XIII. The chief Christian advocate was Geronimo de Santa Fe, formerly a Jewish physician named Joshua Halorqui. The disputation led to more conversions, including members of the prominent de la Caballeria family and entire Jewish communities in Aragon. Although this threatened the Jewish community, it also had a positive outcome. In 1416, the new king of Aragon, Alfonso V, reversed the anti-Jewish legislation and protected the Jews and conversos firmly. Policies aimed at separating Jews from Christians were frequently attempted but rarely enforced. In Castile, the 1412 decree requiring separation was never put into practice. In Aragon, King Alfonso refused to sanction ghettos, and local measures met the same fate. For example, in Seville in 1437, Jews were ordered to live only in their quarter, but by 1450, they were found in different parts of the city. In Soria, separation orders in 1412 and 1477 were never observed. In the 1460s, Christian leaders in Castile, such as Alonso de Oropsa, argued that separating Jews would reduce the influence of conversos. In 1480, the crown agreed to enforce separation in Castile, decreeing that Jews should remain in their ghettos, sometimes separated by walls. However, these laws were often ignored. In Soria in 1489, wealthy Jews still lived outside the ghetto. In Orense, the city authorities ordered the Jewish community to follow the laws of Toledo, but no steps were taken to enforce them. The fall in the number of Jews left a significant mark. By 1492, only 1/4 of the Jews remained in the crown of Aragon compared to a century earlier. Major communities in Barcelona, Valencia, and Mallorca had disappeared, and smaller towns saw their Jewish populations reduced to tiny numbers. In Castile, the situation was mixed, with some communities surviving while others disappeared entirely. Ferdinand and Isabella, who came to power in 1474, were determined to maintain peace between Jews and Christians. They were not personally anti-Semitic and had Jewish doctors and financiers as close collaborators. They took the Jews under their direct protection, declaring that all Jews in their realms were under their care and protection. For example, in 1477, Isabella extended her protection to the Jewish community in Trujillo, and in 1479, she protected the fragile Jewish community in Caceres. The crown intervened in local politics to protect Jews from municipal restrictions, such as in Bilbao and Almedo. However, social tensions persisted. In 1476, the courts of Madrigal passed sumptuary laws against Jews and mutigeres, enforcing the wearing of distinctive symbols and restricting usury. In 1480, the courts of Toledo tried to enforce separation and restrict Jews to aljamas, causing real hardships. Anti-Jewish measures in municipalities, such as in Burgos, where Jews were not allowed to sell food or close the aljama on feast days, were common. The position of Jews was also affected by hostility towards conversos, who were seen as practicing their former faith. In 1478, Ferdinand and Isabella established the Inquisition to combat Judaizers, which affected Jews as well. The Inquisition's activities forced Jews to revise their attitude towards conversos, leading to tensions and even false testimony against them. Despite these challenges, the Jewish community continued to survive and maintain its identity. The Inquisition's efforts to separate Jews from Christians led to partial expulsions in Andalusia and other regions, but these were often not fully carried out. By the late 1480s, Ferdinand and Isabella, influenced by the Inquisitor General Torquemada, decided on a more drastic measure, the total expulsion of Jews from Spain. This decision would have profound and far-reaching consequences for the Jewish community and the country as a whole. The year 1492 marked a turning point in Spanish history. Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs, had just completed the Reconquista by conquering Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. Flush with victory and a sense of divine favor, they issued a decree that would forever change the face of their kingdom, the Edict of Expulsion. This edict gave the Jews of Spain until July 31st to either convert to Christianity or leave the country. The decision was a difficult one for the monarchs. They feared losing the financial contributions of the Jewish community, which had long been a source of direct revenue to the crown and had even helped finance the war in Granada. However, social and economic tensions between Jews and Christians had been simmering for years. Many old Christian elites and local authorities saw the Jews as a source of conflict and competition. Despite these concerns, the king and queen believed that the expulsion was necessary for religious reasons. They were encouraged by the success of the Inquisition, which had been working to root out heresy and convert Jews and conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, but were suspected of practicing Judaism in secret. When the news of the edict spread, a delegation led by Isaac Abravanel, a prominent Jewish leader, went to the royal court to plead for reconsideration. They offered a large sum of money, but the king and queen were resolute. It is said that the Grand Inquisitor, Tomás de Torquemada, dramatically entered the royal chambers and threw 30 pieces of silver on the table, reminding the monarchs of the price at which Christ was betrayed. The story, whether true or not, underscored the deep religious motivations behind the expulsion. The edict stated that the great harm suffered by Christians from interacting with Jews could only be resolved by complete separation. The Inquisition, which had been pushing for regional expulsions since 1481, played a key role in drafting the edict. The king and queen were clear that they were acting for the salvation of souls, despite the financial harm it would cause. The expulsion was a traumatic event for the Jewish community. Many Jews sold their homes and belongings for a fraction of their value, unable to take gold or silver out of the country. They faced overcrowded and poorly managed ships, and many were driven back by storms or attacked by pirates. Some returned to Spain, preferring to convert rather than face the dangers of exile. The suffering was immense, and the stories of those who left are filled with heartbreak and loss. Despite the dire situation, not all Jews left. Many chose to convert, a practice that had been a part of Jewish history for centuries. The chroniclers of the time noted that thousands converted, often out of fear of losing their homes and livelihoods. In the end, it is estimated that only a portion of the Jewish population of Spain, around 80,000 people, was affected by the expulsion. Some went to Italy, others to North Africa, and many to Portugal, where they would face another expulsion in 1497. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain was not an isolated event. Similar expulsions had occurred in other parts of Europe, including France, Italy, and Poland. In Spain, however, the decision was seen as a decisive act to eliminate a religion rather than a people. The king and queen's actions were influenced by a mix of religious zeal, political considerations, and the rise of a virulent anti-Semitism fueled by atrocity stories and the Inquisition's propaganda. The legacy of the expulsion continued to shape Spanish society for centuries. For the Jews who left, the journey was a painful one, filled with loss and struggle. For those who remained, the experience of conversion and the fear of the Inquisition created a new kind of tension. The expulsion of 1492 remains a powerful symbol of the complex and often tragic history of religious and ethnic relations in Europe.